The man who first requested her never even stepped off the platform. The train hissed as it slowed into Abandon, Wyoming, its iron lungs exhaling long ribbons of steam across the dust-packed earth. Clara Holt sat still in the third car with her gloved hands clenched tightly in her lap. A faded bonnet shaded her face, though she had taken care to powder her cheeks and pin back her coarse brown hair. She had even softened her expression in the mirror of the Pullman car, practicing a smile that might make her appear more gentle, more manageable. She saw him standing on the platform before the train came to a complete halt. Whit Bennett. He matched the daguerreotype she'd been sent, a tall man with a square chin and the stance of someone who'd spent his life breaking animals. He held his hat low over his brow as he scanned the cars, and for a moment she thought she saw something settle in his eyes. Recognition, anticipation, maybe even relief. But as she stepped down, clutching her small carpet bag, something in his face changed. He looked past her, then through her, then lowered his eyes entirely. He turned his back to her without a word and walked away. By the time she realized what was happening, his boots were vanishing into the sunlit distance, dust curling behind him like a trail of contempt. She stood there on the platform as the conductor shouted and the train rolled on, carrying away the few strangers she might have clung to. The heat had begun to bleed through the fabric of her dress, but she stood rooted as if something inside her had frozen. Her rejection had not been a mistake. He had seen her. He had made a decision. The station master came out eventually and scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. "You Miss Holt?" he asked. She nodded, too proud to speak. "I don't reckon Mr. Bennett'll be coming back," said something 'bout being misled. Clara didn't ask for clarity. She didn't cry either. She sat on the edge of the platform for the next hour, baking quietly under the unrelenting sun while wagons came and went and no one offered her a lift. She watched the parched land stretch out around her, brittle and brittle-smelling, until the heat painted strange shapes on the horizon. By the time she stood again, her bones ached like they'd been buried. She made her way into town on foot. Abandon was not much more than its name: 2 saloons, a church, a general store, and a scattering of cabins that sagged against the wind. She found a boarding house with a hollow-eyed woman who rented her a room and warned her about rattlers, drunkards, and worse. That night Clara lay awake in a narrow bed, listening to coyotes in the hills. She pressed her fingers to her face as if to study what had disgusted him so thoroughly: a nose a little too blunt, a chin not softly rounded like the fashion plates, skin tanned by work and weather, a jaw that sometimes clenched when she didn't want it to. She had never believed herself beautiful, but neither had she known she was unworthy of a glance. The next day, she returned to the telegraph office and wrote a note to the broker who'd arranged her match. It was brief. "Man refused me on arrival, will not return east, will seek work." It would be 3 weeks before a reply came, and by then she would no longer be waiting. Clara found work in the kitchen of a saloon where the cook had broken her arm fending off a drunk with a carving knife. The owner, a stringy woman named Dell, let Clara sleep on a cot in the cellar and paid her $1 a week to peel potatoes, scrub pots, and keep her mouth shut. She was not permitted upstairs during the busy hours. "Face like that'll scare the paying ones," Dell said without heat. It was just the way things were. But Clara could move fast and endure long hours without complaint. She'd been in service since she was 12, first to a butcher's family, then to a milliner who beat her for stitching too slow. Work had shaped her, thickened her wrists, hardened her soles. Dell saw that and added her to the ledger with the notation, "Strong back, no nonsense." In the early mornings, Clara walked the edge of town with a tin pail to fetch water. She would stop near the paddocks where ranchers brought in their horses for trade or injury. That's where she saw him for the first time. He was not like the others, didn't dress for display. Wore old wool, a coat gone shiny at the elbows, and boots that hadn't been cleaned since snowmelt. He moved like a man used to silence, giving short commands to a chestnut gelding whose leg he was bandaging with an odd tenderness. His name, she learned later from a stable boy, was Elias Roan. He owned a stretch of land west of town, too dry for crops, too wild for neighbors. They said he'd inherited it from his father, who drank himself to death one winter trying to kill the voices in his head. Elias rarely came to town except to trade lumber or bring in an injured animal. He didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't raise his voice. The first time he saw Clara, he nodded, nothing more. She nodded back. And yet after that, she kept rising earlier, taking longer routes, watching the sky for signs of when he might return. Weeks passed, then one day, a note came back from the broker. Clara opened it in the dim light of the cellar and read the two sentences that cut clean as any blade. No further suitors matched. Consider returning east. You are not suitable for re-entry into the register. She folded the note slowly and set it in the fire beneath the stove. Her hand did not shake. Dell came down later to find her chopping onions like she was trying to break the board. "You're not a crier, are you?" Dell asked. "No," Clara said. "I'm good." But she dreamed that night of Whit Bennett's retreating back, of the broker's inked dismissal, of her own reflection in the water bucket, warped and wide and too sharp at the edges. Then, not a week later, Elias Roan came to the saloon. Not for drink, not for cards. He came to speak to Clara, not to Dell, not to anyone else. And when he asked if she'd consider working on his ranch, where the cooking was poor and the roof needed patching, Clara looked him full in the face. "What makes you think I'm fit for anything more than a scullery?" His voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. "I don't hire for looks," he said. "I hire for spine." Clara stared at him for a long time. Then she untied her apron, folded it, and left it on the cot. The land west of Abandon didn't welcome, not even in spring. It stretched ragged and sun-hardened, the hills rising like ribs from the earth's chest, gray-green with scrub and shadow. Elias' ranch sat tucked against the spine of one such ridge, half a day's ride from town. Clara didn't ask for a wagon, she walked. By the time she arrived, dust clung to her hem and the back of her throat felt scraped raw, but she didn't slow. Elias waited on the porch of a low house made of stone and old lumber. His dogs rose but didn't bark. He watched her come, then stepped aside and opened the door. Inside was sparse but clean, one room wide, one room deep, wood stove, wash basin, two chairs, a rifle hung above the hearth. There were boots by the door, a kettle already on the stove, and a single bed pushed into the corner with a folded quilt across its foot. He'd moved out his things before she ever got there. She understood that before he said anything. "You'll sleep here," he said. "I've got a cot in the barn. I like it out there better." Clara looked around and nodded once. Then she set down her bag and took off her gloves. For the next weeks they did not speak much. Work filled every hour. The roof leaked, she patched it. The stove smoked, she cleaned the flue. There was a vegetable patch gone wild with weeds. She cleared it by hand, tearing roots from dry clay, fingers bleeding under her nails. At night, she soaked beans, trimmed fat from meat, stitched canvas where the wind had split it. She made meals that didn't burn, and soon Elias started eating full plates without needing coaxing. He worked beside her during the day, fencing wire, riding out to check stock, mending saddle leather by lamplight when his hands were already blistered. He spoke only when needed, and when he did, it was with a steadiness that unsettled her. He didn't tell her she was strong. He didn't tell her she was plain. He didn't offer comfort or insult. He simply treated her as if she belonged there. Clara did not trust it, not at first. She waited for the reversal, the mocking, the disgust that always came when men realized her face did not soften in the right places. But Elias didn't soften either. He carried himself like stone shaped by time, and Clara found in that a strange relief. One morning, a dust storm rose from the south and smothered the hills in yellow air. The wind howled so hard the dogs whimpered and huddled beneath the porch. Clara stuffed rags in the window cracks and soaked cloths to breathe through. The storm pounded for nearly a day, and when it passed, half the chicken coop had blown over and the garden was a ruin. They worked until their fingers cracked, resetting posts, hauling water for the limp and battered hens. Clara's skirts caught on barbed wire and tore up the side. She didn't mend it. She tied the hem at her knees and climbed into the coop herself, shoveling out debris until her lungs screamed. That night, Elia sat across from her at the table, silent as always. But then, softly, "You don't scare easy." She looked up. "I've already been left behind," she said. "Wind doesn't frighten me." He didn't ask what had happened before the ranch, he never asked. But there was something different in his eyes now, not sympathy, not pity, something steadier, like respect. She dreamed that night of open plains, of wind that didn't hurt her. 3 months passed. They fell into rhythm. In town, the talk shifted, people noticed. "That roan fella took in that rejected girl," they said in whispers that turned to laughter. "He must be blind or desperate." Dell came once with a wagon of dried goods and barked a laugh when she saw Clara chopping wood in a man's shirt. "Well, look at you," Dell said. "Little mouse turned mule." Clara kept chopping, didn't pause, didn't answer. That winter, Elias caught a fever from a frostbit ride out to a calving cow. He came back gray-lipped and shaking, blood on his sleeve from where the wire had bit him. Clara half carried him to the barn, where he insisted on sleeping still. "Not your house," he muttered, already slipping under. She stayed 3 nights at his side. Built a fire so hot it cracked the trough. Boiled willow bark and forced it between his teeth. Washed the blood from his shirt and dried it across her knees. On the 4th morning, when he opened his eyes again, he said nothing. Just reached weakly and took her hand. His fingers were calloused and shaking. She didn't pull away. After that, something shifted, not quickly, not all at once. But he stopped calling her Miss Holt. She stopped waiting for him, too. In spring, he brought home a small mirror from town and left it on the washstand. She stared at it for a long time before touching it. She did not look inside. In summer, they began fencing the West Ridge together. He taught her how to loop wire tight, how to brace against rock, how to listen for the tension in the posts. At night, she leaned over maps with him, tracing the edges of land they didn't have names for yet. Then one evening, she sat on the porch long after he'd gone to bed. The moon was bright. The dogs were quiet. She touched her own face, not with shame, not with sorrow. With wonder. No one had called her pretty, not even him. But here she was, full of a new silence, one that did not hurt. And then the men came. They arrived in dust, like a story returning. 3 riders, all dressed clean but not polished, too sure of themselves for that. One wore a bowler, the other 2 broad hats with dark bands. They came at a walk, not a gallop, but they rode like men who didn't expect to be questioned. Dust creaked off their coats as they dismounted in front of Elias' porch. Clara stepped outside with her sleeves rolled and her hands still wet from dishwater. She saw the horses first, glossy, well-fed, eastern shod, then the men, and one of them, God help her, was Whit Bennett. He didn't recognize her, not at first. He stood behind the younger one, the mouthy one, the one who spoke with a smile too fast to be real. "Mr. Roan home?" he asked. Clara didn't answer. She looked straight past him and met Whit's eyes. That's when the color left his face. The third man squinted, annoyed. "Miss, we're looking for Elias Roan. We've got business." "I'll fetch him," Clara said. Her voice held no tremble. Elias came from the north paddock with his sleeves rolled and his hat low. The dogs circled the porch but didn't bark. They sensed something off. The lead man, who introduced himself as Mr. Sedge, smiled again, this time at Elias. "Land's changing hands," he said. "East Company's buying up riverfronts. We've got cash, more than fair." Elias didn't nod, didn't frown. He just stared like the words hadn't landed. "I'm not selling," he said. Sedge chuckled. "We're not asking." That night Clara and Elias sat in silence, the lantern between them flickering like it too was uneasy. She didn't ask why Whit was with them. Didn't ask how Elias knew more than he said. She only asked what she needed. "You'll stay," she said. Elias looked at her. The firelight caught the planes of his face, the hollows, the old scars under his eyes. Then he nodded. "Till the bones rot," he said. After that, she slept with the shotgun propped against the doorframe. The next weeks came hard. The river dropped. The water Elias relied on for stock slowed to a trickle, and when he rode out to investigate, he found a crude wooden gate, fresh timber driven into the earth upstream, water trapped, rerooted. The land above now bore stakes, surveyor marks, eastern flags. Clara rode out with him the second time. She saw the slash of the new road they were cutting through the cottonwoods, saw the wagons already moving in with tents, canvas roofs straining under crates of tools and ledgers. "They're not waiting," Elias said. When they rode back, they passed a coyote hung from a tree by its hind legs. A warning, a message. Clara stared at it a long time. Later, she found the carving knife she'd brought from the saloon. She kept it for its edge, the balance of it. It sat now beside her water basin, cleaned until the metal gleamed. Dell came by 2 days later. She brought flour and bacon, and a warning. "They'll gut you," she said. "That man Bennett, he's a bastard's bastard, lied to every girl from here to Billings." "I know what he is," Clara said. Dell studied her. "You're not the same girl who scrubbed my floors." "No." Dell didn't press. She only nodded once and rode off. That night, Elias found Clara mending the barn door in the dark. "You don't need to do all this," he said. She didn't look up. "Yes, I do." The raid came a week later. They waited until dusk, when the sky went violet and the animals quieted. Clara heard them before she saw them, horses moving slow, boots hitting the dirt. She roused Elias. He was already reaching for the rifle. They came without torches, but the dark couldn't hide their voices. Men speaking low, expecting fear. Clara didn't feel it. When the first window shattered, Elias opened fire. He took one down before the others scattered. They fired back, wild and high, more to scare than hit. Clara crawled low through the house, the shotgun in her arms, her heart pounding steady but hard. When one tried the door, she was there. She fired through the wood, heard the scream, and felt something hot rise in her chest. After that, they fled, not far, but enough. When the dust settled and the moon returned, Elias checked her for wounds. "You all right?" She nodded. "I'm not fragile." "I know." He touched her face then, not like a man who sought beauty, like a man who knew where the strength lived. The next day, they rode to town to file charges. Sheriff Turnley shrugged. "You can't prove it was them, and they didn't take anything. No crime committed." "They tried to kill us," Clara said. "Prove it," Turnley said, "or leave." They rode back in silence. But that night, Elias dug out the old maps. He laid them on the table, traced borders, read deeds. Clara stood beside him and said only one thing. "If we're going to lose this land, let's make them blide for it." Elias looked up. He didn't smile, but he placed her hand on the deed and said, "We won't lose." A new kind of work began. They cut trails through the brush no one else knew, hid supplies, dug trenches in the dark, moved fences overnight. Clara learned to ride with a rifle strapped to her back, to aim at silhouettes, to mark time by the hush of animals. By August, the land was no longer still. It was watching. And somewhere in the hills, Whit Bennett waited. The first real blood came quiet. A calf disappeared from the lower range. They found it gutted near the fence line, its hide sliced in a way no predator worked. Beside it, a stake had been driven into the soil, a ribbon tied around the top, eastern blue. Clara stood over the carcass without blinking. Elias crouched, ran his fingers through the dry grass and picked out a shard of boot leather, burned at the edge, a mark left not by accident but as message. They were saying, "We know where your line ends." "They're goading us," Elias said. Clara looked at the fence, then past it. "They think we'll run." Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. They burned the calf where it lay. That night she took the knife from the wash basin and tucked it inside her boot. By the end of the month, Elias had closed off the back trail, rerouted the water from his well to feed his own crops, and rigged tripwire bells along the north slope. Clara learned to set snares, not for food, but for warning. She built false trails with their dogs, rode empty loops to leave scent where they wouldn't be. The tension turned their bones into barbed wire. Even the quiet between them became a kind of steel. They spoke rarely now. But they watched everything. Once, while hauling water, Clara found a dead bird nailed to a post. She pulled it free and buried it without a word. She never mentioned how the beak had been pressed to point east, toward town. The Easterners came again, this time not with guns but papers. A man in a coat too clean for the dust, with nails like polished shell. He rode in on a mule wagon and handed Elias a folded document with ribbons and seals. "Claim been revoked," the man said, brushing at his collar like the land offended him. "Water rights suspended until full investigation." Elias read it once, then again. Clara read his face. She knew what the words meant before she saw them. They were choking the land without touching it. "Who signed this?" Elias asked. But the man had already turned. Clara watched him go, and for the first time she felt something cold take root in her chest. Not anger, not fear. Something older. They rode to Abandon, together this time. She wore her work shirt, gun belt cinched over her coat. The general store went quiet when they entered. At the sheriff, Turnley didn't even stand up. "Back again," he said, spitting into a tin. "You people sure do love trouble." Elias laid the paper down. "You co-sign this." "I don't deal in legal disputes," Turnley said. "Just law." "What's the difference?" Clara asked. "The law who has more ink." She stepped forward. "And what's it cost to buy your ink?" Turnley's smile vanished. He leaned back in his chair, hand drifting to the revolver on his desk. Elias put his hand on her arm before she could speak again. They left without another word. Outside, Elias handed her the reins. "We'll fight them another way," he said. Clara didn't answer. But that night she took a lamp and walked to the backfield alone. There was a place under the ridge where the soil ran black and loose, where the scrub grew tangled. She dug a hole there, not deep, just enough for a box. In the box she placed three things: a ribbon, a mirror shard, and the corner of the broker's letter she'd kept hidden in her sewing kit. Then she burned the rest. Fall came like a closing hand. The Easterners moved their camp closer, brought in machinery, teams of workers, oxen to haul lumber. A crane was built beside the river. Foundations dug with noise that didn't stop, not even at night. Elias called a meeting with the few ranchers left. 3 showed, 2 spoke of leaving. One, an old widow named Mags, spat and said she'd rather burn her land than sell it. "They'll crush us," one of the others said. "It's not just about land, it's power now, principle." Mags cracked her knuckles. "Then we give 'em hell with principle." Afterward, Clara walked with Elias past the tree line. The dogs ran ahead, scenting wild things. She didn't speak until they crested the ridge. "You still think this is winnable?" Elias looked at the hills. "I think it's necessary." She watched the way the wind combed his hair back, the way his eyes stayed still. "Do you want me here because I can work?" she asked, "or because you care?" His jaw moved, but he didn't turn to her. "Is there a difference to you?" "Yes," she said. He was quiet a long time. "Then I care because you stayed when no one else would." That night she slept beside him in the barn. Not for warmth, not for safety, but because the war was beginning and she needed to know where his breath was. 3 days later, Whit Bennett showed up again. Alone. He rode to the edge of the property and waited there like he didn't expect to be welcomed, like he knew what it meant to step foot on the land he'd once mocked. Clara saw him from the porch and walked out slow, rifle cradled in her arms. Elias was gone to town for feed. "Don't speak," she said as he dismounted. "But Whit did. I didn't know it was you." Clara said nothing. I was young, thought I could afford to be cruel." She took one step closer. "You thought you could define me." He swallowed. "I was wrong." She studied his face. He'd changed. His arrogance had curdled into something worse, regret. "I didn't come for forgiveness," he said. "I came to warn you. Sedge plans to torch the barn. Tonight, insurance claim." Clara narrowed her eyes. "And what do you want?" He looked away, to be on the right side for once. She turned, started walking back. "You don't get a side," she said. "You had your chance. You chose contempt." And with that, she shut the door in his face. She stayed up all night in the rafters, rifle loaded. The barn never burned. But she saw movement in the dark, 3 shadows. They didn't come close again. Something in the way Clara moved now scared them. It should. Because inside her, something old was waking. The final frost came late that year. It sheathed the ground in a thin skin of ice that cracked under boots and killed the last of the beans Clara had tried to coax from dying soil. Nothing green remained, just dry stalks rattling in the wind and the quiet sound of defeat pressing in from all sides. But she did not let it in. She rose each morning as if there were still something to save, swept the porch, mended what broke, cooked food Elias sometimes forgot to eat. There was a calm in her now that did not resemble peace. It was colder, sharper, like a blade ground so long it forgot what it was before steel. The Easterners had stopped being subtle. Machinery chewed closer to the riverbank, dragging rocks and soil with metal teeth. Their new road carved straight through the old cattle path, a gash so deep the trees leaned away from it. And then came the fences, iron and wire and taller than they needed to be. Sedge visited the ranch one last time. He came on a buggy with 2 lawyers and a boy who held a clipboard. They wore dustless coats, soft shoes, smiled like undertakers. "This is your last offer," Sedge said, unfolding a fresh deed. Elias didn't touch it. "You've got till the end of the month. After that, we come with courtmen." Clara stepped out of the doorway. "You'll come with fire," she said. Sedge's smile shrank. The lawyer beside him shifted uneasily. "I'd think about the future," Sedge said. You're not young. She's not what anyone would call. Elias stepped forward. His hands were still. His eyes were not. You'll leave now. Sedge hesitated. Then he saw Clara behind Elias, holding a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Not a gun, something else, something older. They left. That night, Elias took down the rifle from over the hearth. Courtmen are worse than raiders, he said. I know. They'll come with orders, not bullets. Clara opened the oilcloth. Inside was the carving knife. Its edge had been honed down to a silver whisper. She ran her finger along the spine, not enough to draw blood, just enough to feel its promise. I won't beg them for my home, she said. I never asked you to. I'm not doing it for you. I know that too. They didn't speak the rest of the night. But when dawn came, they moved together. 3 days before the deadline, the fire came. Not from their hands. From Sedge's. Under cover of dusk, 2 hired men rode up the north slope and lit the dry brush with pitch. The wind did the rest. It swept flames down into the western pasture, licking at the fences, the troughs, the barn roof. Clara saw it first. She screamed for Elias, then ran for the well, dragging buckets with ropes that bit into her palms. He followed without speaking, beating the edges of the blaze with a wet canvas. They worked until the smoke seared their lungs, until their skin blistered, until the fire gave up out of boredom or exhaustion and left behind only steam and blackened ash. The pasture was gone, the horses scattered, the feed ruined. But the house stood. Barely. Elias collapsed on the porch. Clara stood over him, her dress streaked with soot and her hair hanging in ropes. They'll say we lit it ourselves, she said, for sympathy, for acclaim. Elias nodded. They'll bring a writ, make it legal. Clara's voice went flat. Then we make it final. 2 nights later, she rode to the eastern camp alone. Not by road, through the canyon. She wore a man's coat and a scarf pulled high over her face. Her eyes were bare. That was enough. When she reached the tents, she tethered the horse to a tree and moved silent through the brush. A sentry sat by a low fire, half asleep, rifle loose in his lap. She watched the rhythm of his breath, waited for it to deepen, then passed him like shadow. She found Sedge's tent by its size. He slept on a cot of polished wood, his boots beside it, his pistol in a holster on a chair. She did not touch the pistol. She touched the knife. She did not kill him. She left the ribbon from her carpetbag tied around his wrist. When he woke, it would tell him everything. The ribbon from the train station, the one she wore when he first walked away. Let him explain that to his lawyers. Let him feel hunted. By the end of the week, the camp began to thin. The company pulled back, citing unrest, sabotage, legal disputes. They blamed stolen cattle, missing survey tools, a burned crate of blueprints. No arrests were made. Sedge vanished, rumors spread. Some said he'd gone east, others whispered darker things. But Clara knew. He'd gone somewhere quieter. He'd learned what it meant to feel powerless in the dark. Snow came early that year, heavy and clean. Clara stood on the porch and watched it fall. The house still bore scars, but the walls were dry, the stove warm, the fences mended. Elias came out with 2 mugs, handed her one. You stayed, he said. I always would. He nodded. She looked out over the land, still wounded, still hers. I used to think I was broken, she said. You were, Elias said. So was I. And now. He didn't answer. But he took her hand, not like a man claiming, not like a man asking, like one who'd learned that the ugliest truths are also the strongest. Inside the house, the fire snapped gently. Outside, the land waited. And Clara, the woman once deemed too ugly to be claimed, now stood on a piece of earth that belonged to her not by gift, not by mercy, but by war, by will, and by the long memory of a girl who had once been left on a platform to rot. She did not forget. She never would. And she didn't need to.